Move into item number 8 under scheduled matters, and that is consider receiving a report on dam breach inundation maps for Nacimiento Dam and San Antonio Dam. And Chris Moss is up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Board of Directors. I'm Chris Moss, Senior Water Resources Engineer with the agency. This item is to consider receiving a report on dam breach inundation maps for Nacimiento Dam and San Antonio Dam. There's no financial impact to receiving this report. Prior board action was the approval of 2 amendments to a contract with AECom Technical Services, totaling $76,010 for production of the inundation maps paid from the Hydroelectric Fund 130. So Nacimiento Dam and San Antonio Dam are both classified as extremely high downstream hazard potential dams by the California Department of Water Resources Division of Safety of Dams. The hazard classification is based on the potential for loss of life and economic, environmental, and lifeline losses downstream of a dam in the event of catastrophic failure. The hazard classification does not indicate the condition of a dam. This is the criteria used by DSOD to determine the downstream hazard classification. So in the extremely high classification, the loss of human life is considerable. In the event of a full reservoir at Nacimiento Dam and a catastrophic breach, there are about, according to the 2010 census data, there are approximately 10,000 residents within the area that would be inundated. So there is considerable potential for loss of human life. Economic, environmental, and lifeline losses, major impacts to critical infrastructure or property is the criteria, and that could certainly occur, would occur if either of the dams breached. So clearly they're both in the extremely high category. 2017 state law requires emergency action plan preparation and inundation mapping for a dam failure scenario or failure of the dam embankment itself, and critical appurtenant structure failure scenarios for all extremely high hazard potential dams and other dams as well. The critical appurtenant structures in our cases are the spillways. And so in accordance with that law, the inundation mapping was modeled and produced for a total of 4 failure scenarios as follows. So the first one is the failure of the embankment itself of Nacimiento Dam with a full reservoir, meaning the water is at the top of the spillway, and there's no inflow to the reservoir. It's referred to as a sunny day failure. We do not compound failure situations, so it's not a big old flood on top of a dam breach. The same type of failure is modeled and mapped for San Antonio Dam, the embankment failing with a full reservoir, no inflow to the reservoir. And then the spillway failing at Nacimiento Dam with the full reservoir, resulting in a 50-foot deep by 157-foot notch or opening, allowing uncontrolled release of water. The dam would remain intact in that scenario. And then the same thing for San Antonio concrete spillway failure. The full reservoir, that would result in an 8.5-foot tall by 140-foot wide opening, allowing uncontrolled release of water. So this table shows the estimated peak flow, the estimated flood arrival time, and the estimated peak flood arrival time for a Nacimiento Dam breach on the right-hand side and San Antonio Dam breach on the left-hand side. So moving from upstream to downstream, looking at the Nacimiento numbers on the right, in blue are the population centers that would be flooded entirely or partially. Moving downstream, so Camp Roberts, within an hour and a half or so, would see a peak flow of about 3.3 million cubic feet per second. Bradley would be inundated. San Miguel upstream on the Nacimiento River, portions of that would be inundated by the backwater created. San Ardo would be inundated. The greenish color there is water would be lapping right up against San Lucas. Portion of King City would be inundated. Water would be lapping at the south edge of Soledad. Spreckles, a portion of Salinas, Castroville, and Moss Landing flooding would occur as well. So these dam embankment failure scenarios result in extreme downstream flooding, far deeper and far wider and faster moving than a 100-year flood. So point of reference, last Friday, the Mississippi River flow at Vicksburg, Mississippi was a little over 1.2 million cubic feet per second. On the left-hand side of the table is the San Antonio Dam breach. You can see the numbers there are just a little below 1 million cubic feet per second. So if either dam failed catastrophically with a full reservoir, or I would say a near full reservoir, it'd be the Mississippi River flowing down the Salinas Valley. So I have a few maps here for quick reference. Nacimiento is on the right. San Antonio is on the left, and on these few maps that I'll show. These maps show inundation depth by color code. The darker the blue, the deeper the water. The very dark blue is about 50 feet deep or so. So on the left you can see San Antonio results in very deep water in places. The same for Nacimiento on the right. And the portion of Camp Roberts that sees flooding. Bradley is inundated in either scenario, deeper with Nacimiento versus San Antonio. San Ardo is inundated under a Nacimiento breach. The 3 hours there is the approximate arrival time. On the left, a portion of San Ardo is inundated. The arrival time is roughly 5 hours. Under San Antonio breach. King City, about the same area of King City is inundated, not as deep under San Antonio scenario as Nacimiento. Spreckles, Salinas, further downstream, Spreckles is inundated in both scenarios, a portion of South Salinas in both scenarios as well. Arrival time with Nacimiento is about 18 hours and roughly 24 hours in a San Antonio scenario. Lastly, Castroville. Portions of Castroville are inundated in both scenarios, as well as Moss Landing. So for the critical appurtenance structure failure, the spillways, in other words, for each at each dam, the flow numbers estimated for Nacimiento on the right, for San Antonio spillway failure on the left. For Nacimiento, you can see mostly the same areas are flooded to some degree by the blue, and the flows are considerably smaller, although enough to cause flooding. A San Antonio spillway failure on the left would result in flooding in Moss Landing under a high tide situation. So in summary, extremely high potential for downstream loss of life and damage exists if Nacimiento Dam or San Antonio Dam breaches catastrophically with a full or less than full reservoir, including inundation at the population centers of Camp Roberts, Bradley, San Ardo, King City, Spreckles, Salinas, Castroville, Moss Landing, the central Salinas Valley, transportation lifelines including 17 bridges, portions of State Highway 101, Highway 68, and Highway 1, the rail line, and many county roads. Under a Nacimiento Dam embankment failure scenario, it would result in inundation of a portion of San Miguel in San Luis Obispo County as well. Emergency action plans for both dams are being updated and will be reviewed and approved by the California Office of Emergency Services. And in the case of the Nacimiento Emergency Action Plan, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission reviews and approves that one as well. Inundation maps for all the failure scenarios are approved by the Division of Safety of Dams, and the maps will be posted on the agency website. And I do apologize, in your board report it says they already are. We found one item that needs correction that we'll make before we put them on the website, but they will be soon, I'd say in the next, I don't know, week to 10 days. So that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions.
Very good. Any comments, Director LeBar? Or Ortiz?
Thank you for the report. Was this also with the Office of Emergency Service, the deal that they have down south? Is this in coordination with them? Or this is something done separately?
Well, this is done separately, but what I think you're referring to is there was what we call a functional exercise of the emergency action plan that was done in October, last October, with the County Office of Emergency Services and many other first responders, Sheriff's Department, police departments, fire departments, and we simulate a breach of the dam and the response to it.
Okay,
And so that was performed
this
in
coordination
October.
with them or not?
I'm sorry?
This wasn't involved in that exercise, was it?
Oh, these maps are part of it in terms of the timing of when the water arrives and what's flooded and what roads are accessible and not accessible. Yeah, so they're used.
Yeah, 'cause
During that
if
exercise.
it wasn't, I was going to recommend that they get a copy of it so that they know. But
Yeah.
since it is part of the exercise.
Yeah. And these maps are included as part of the emergency action plan.
Good, okay.
Director LeBar?
Thank you, very enlightening presentation. Just a couple questions. One is looking at the San Ardo and King City is where I'm from. It doesn't seem like there's any ability to prepare for any of this kind of water flow within using barriers or building up walls to help divert it away from the city. The heights look too high for any kind of reasonable structure, is that correct?
Well, I haven't specifically looked at it, but I would think it'd be difficult.
Okay. And the amount of force that would happen, I noticed that you pointed out when the flood would arrive, when the peak portion of the flood would arrive. What is the time that it would end? Is it?
Yeah, good question. Those are, I didn't put them in here just so it didn't take a half an hour to tell you everything, but there is the deflood time, it's called. There's a set of maps for each scenario for the deflood time as
Okay.
well.
And if we want to see those, we just request through staff and we can get copies?
Yeah, you could
Okay.
get copies, or like I say, they'll be online
Oh, okay,
here
the deflood
shortly.
ones
So
will
you
too. Okay,
you can go
excellent.
to your location and,
Appreciate that. And so then the last question is the coordination with cities that are in the inundation area? And so one is those cities that are identified that would be at risk, are we coordinating with the local agencies? And are we working or planning on working on emergency procedures if evacuation was necessary? Because there would be some hours to start moving people out.
yeah, the answer to both those questions are yes. The various jurisdictions, like for King City, for example, the police department and the fire department receive emergency action plans, and every update they receive, they're invited to the functional exercise when we have them. They're included. We also do an emergency call down exercise that they're on to be notified, and I mean, other jurisdictions like the Red Cross, the sheriff. I mean, there's a very long list throughout the county that receives. I think we send out something like around 60 emergency action plans, and there are about that many numbers on the call down list for emergency notification. And then each of them are to have their own plan on what they do, or what their role is in the event of such an emergency.
Okay, and then so for local entities, the best way to understand what their plans are is to ask either the police department or fire department to bring a presentation on what the local plan is for if this emergency happened.
I would say so, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I have a question. Do you have thank you, it was a very interesting presentation. Do you have an idea of how many people, if there was a catastrophic failure, how many people would need to be evacuated and potentially how many structures would be flooded?
Yeah, and the structures, I don't know. It would be a very high number. And according to the 2010 census data, there are approximately 10,000 residents within the inundation area for Nacimiento. San Antonio would be a little less. I don't know that number.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Yeah, Chris, thank you. Good report. I read something similar to this either in this morning's LA Times or yesterday's LA Times. You have weather people now talking about a catastrophic atmospheric river, Pineapple Express, hitting Southern California, inundating all their reservoirs and actually flooding the Los Angeles basin. And it's amazing that a few years ago they were talking about a drought, and now they're talking about how we could flood the Los Angeles basin totally. And they're just coming up with these scenarios now that all these atmospheric rivers that are hitting the West Coast, that this could be possibly bigger than the largest earthquake we've ever had. So hopefully we'll never see this, but I guess it opens people's eyes when you do present a report like this, but thank you.
Any other comments? I just have one, and it's more for just to reiterate for the general public, is that who identifies the welfare of the dams? It's not this agency, right?
I'm sorry, identifies what? I didn't catch that.
Whether a dam is considered unsafe.
Well, we're the front line on that. Yeah, they're your staff, us, me, are the front line on that. Our backups are Division of Safety of Dams, and in the case of Nacimiento, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. But they're not on site. They're rarely on site,
But
actually. They're on site maybe once a year.
DSOD is the one that basically says this dam has a greater potential of failure because of the structure design.
That would be us. In the event of a failure like this, we would be making the call.
All right, thank you. Open it up to the public. Anybody from the public have any comments on this presentation? Seeing none, bring it back to us, and we can have a motion to receive the report on dam breach inundation maps for Nacimiento and San Antonio dams.
So move.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded. Any questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.